This was the scene in Paris this weekend. The Kurdish community in France has been protesting and rioting following a white nationalist murdering 3 Kurdish people in cold blood. A gunman killed 3 Kurdish people and wounded 3 others Friday at a Kurdish community center, at a hair salon, and at a restaurant in central Paris in an attack that French officials said appeared directed at foreigners. That man is now in French custody. New York Times reported that a man arrested in connection with a shooting that left 3 Kurdish people dead in central Paris last week was indicted on charges of murder and attempted murder with a racist motive on Monday, according to French judicial authorities. The decision was closely watched by a Kurdish community that has long sought safety in France and was still reeling from the killing. So, however, many of the Kurds who are protesting don't believe that the shooting was actually racially motivated, but they believe it was a terrorist attack targeting Kurds and carried out with Turkey's help. From the New York Times again, we know it's a political attack, Biravan Farhat, a spokeswoman for the Kurdish Democratic Council in France, a political group, said at a march on Monday near the site of the shooting. Hundreds of people attended the demonstration, calling for further investigation. However, the French officials have not released any evidence suggesting the shooter is affiliated with any Turkish group, but they believe it was motivated by deep-seated racism and anti-immigrant beliefs. In a statement released on Sunday, the Paris prosecutor Laure Bicou said the 69-year-old suspect had told investigators that a burglary at his home in 2016 had triggered a hatred of foreigners that became completely pathological. The man described himself as depressed with suicidal tendencies, adding that before ending his own life, he had always wanted to murder migrant foreigners. So more about the attack itself. He headed to a Kurdish center where he shot dead 2 men, Mir Perwer and Abdulrahman Kizil, and a woman, Amin Kara, who was the leader of the Kurdish women's movement in France. He next headed to a nearby Kurdish barbershop where he wounded 3 more men before being disarmed and subdued. So the shooter claims that he had resentment for the Kurds for detaining Islamic State fighters while fighting the terrorist group in Syria instead of killing them. This also is not the first racist attack he's carried out. A year ago, he was charged with racist armed assault after attacking a migrant camp in Paris with a sword. And he was released awaiting trial recently when he carried out this most recent attack. And despite all his history of racist violence, many Kurdish protesters are unconvinced that this attack was fueled by racism. For us, this is not a racist act at all, said Elise Demir, 36, who was walking amid a crowd of demonstrators as nearby loudspeakers played a Kurdish song. She noted that the neighborhood where the attack occurred was full of foreigners, but that only Kurds had been targeted. The Kurdish Cultural Center that was attacked houses the Kurdish Democratic Council of France. Adel Bakouan, a researcher on the Middle East at the French Institute of International Relations, said the group is an offshoot of the Kurdish Workers' Party, or PKK, which has fought a decades-long insurgency against the Turkish state to win greater autonomy for the Kurds. So I also want to add some context. In 2013, 3 Kurdish militants were murdered in the same area as last week's shootings by a man who was linked with Turkish state intelligence services. Not to mention that Turkey has been attempting to undermine the Kurds' success in fighting Islamic State terrorists in northern Syria. So much so that the Turkish state was willing to fire on United States service members who were working alongside the Kurds in Syria. I don't know whether or not this person who murdered 3 Kurds was either, just motivated by his hatred of immigrants or had some sort of connection to the Turkish state. I do know that there's no reason for them to believe that, which I disagreed with the New York Times article's framing of their belief that this was in some sort of connection to the Turkish state. I think that the, decades of discrimination and persecution that the Kurds have faced by the Turkish state, and the lengths that the Turkish state has proven it's willing to go to suppress, Turkish organizers and suppress members of the PKK. It wouldn't surprise me if it does come out, but it also seems like this man was deeply racist and really, just a violent, awful individual. Jessica, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, it's interesting. We'll never know this person's motivations unless, we uncover some kind of writing that they've done. And, it really is the case in the United States that we get a manifesto or we get to see like terrible Facebook posts that indicate, why someone would do something like this. We don't have that in this case, at least not yet, if it does exist. It is interesting to theorize, why, if this was an area full of foreigners, were these three specific people killed, and he just happened to kill someone who was a leader of the Kurdish movement in France. It doesn't really seem like that would happen by accident. Maybe it did. Maybe it did. We don't know. The thing about France, though, is they really know how to protest, and to me, it seems like they're one of the few people or few societies in the West where culturally they respond appropriately when an act of violence is committed against their community. Like, if we were this outraged whenever we had an act of violence or hate committed against any community in the United States, we would be rioting all of the time. And it's ridiculous to me that it's so often framed that the rioters are the violent people because they burn property, when people and human lives were taken. So we could learn a little bit from the people of France, and there's been a mockery kind of in the media about the framing of protests of being fiery but peaceful. Because I would identify a peaceful protest as one where human beings were not hurt by the people protesting. Burning property isn't hurting human beings. So I don't think it's fair to make a mockery of the framing of fiery but peaceful. And I do think that the Kurdish community in France is reacting appropriately to what happened.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. You see a lot of these people talking about, they'll show a video of the protest and they'll say, this is why immigration is bad. This is why diversity is bad, giving no context to why they're protesting in the first place. But if you put those videos side by side with the yellow vest protests, who are, white French people are participating in, they look the same. It's the most French tactic you could engage in, is rioting when you are demanding justice for something. So the racist framing is just that, racist and Islamophobic.